Hi, and welcome to Module 5 in this self-help program for social anxiety. In the previous modules, we've introduced the cognitive module of social anxiety and gone through the rationale behind exposure therapy. In this module, we will continue where we left off and take a closer look at self-focus during exposure therapy. Lastly, we'll review how to deal with safety behaviors during exposure. Self-focus is an automatic process that happens when we get social anxiety. Perhaps you get a mental image in your head of yourself, or feel that your face is blushing, or think about your speech, or how you look, or how you behave in general. As we mentioned earlier, this is a problem because self-focus makes it very difficult to have a normal conversation, give a good presentation, or generally get information from the world around you. Self-focus is at the heart of the cognitive module of social anxiety. The simplest and best way to deal with self-focus is to try to do the opposite, maintaining focus on what's happening around you and not inside you. In a social setting, there are many things that are worth noting. What are people talking about? How do they look? What facial expressions do they have? What kind of postures do they have? You can make a game for yourself in anxious situations. This game is to notice as many details in your environment as possible. Do you remember what kind of clothes the others wore? How many of them were there? What did they say and how did they say it? Can you keep eye contact to see what eye color people have? Initially, this will be very difficult because you have to actively change your attention from being inward to being outward, something that feels completely unnatural when you're experiencing social anxiety. Fortunately, our attention can be trained just like a muscle, and you get stronger if you exercise regularly. With exercise, you can get so good that you can keep an outward focus even if you're experiencing social anxiety. We also recommend that you start with a few exercises in outward focus in situations that are not anxious. For example, you can go for a walk in the park and practice focusing on what you hear, look, smell and feel. Then you can gradually increase the difficulty while maintaining a strict outward focus. Can you, for example, buy something at the store while maintaining outward focus? Taking notice of what the store looks like, the employees' facial features, etc. Remember that the goal of this exercise is not to avoid anxiety. Your anxiety should come and go without you trying to control it. The goal is to keep outward focus even if you're anxious. However, a question remains. What should you do with the anxious feeling itself? The feeling you get in social situations? Here's the answer. The best thing one can do with the anxious feeling is to accept it. You accept the feeling when you just leave it as it is, without trying to control or change it. If you have an accepting attitude, you can say, yeah, I can feel the anxiety coming along. My heart's beating fast, my body's shaking slightly, and my voice sounds strange. There's not much I can do about that right now. I'll just let the feeling be, while I'll try to have a good time and hear what the others are talking about. Another way to describe this is to attempt to lean into anxiety, meaning that one actively seeks anxiety while not doing anything to control or reduce it. To illustrate this point, you can imagine a tug of war between yourself and a big, scary anxiety monster. Between yourself and the anxiety monster, there is a bottomless pit. The monster is bigger than you, stronger than you, smarter than you. You can't toughen up, take control, show who's boss, or push the envelope. That can only lead to the monster pulling you into the hole. The alternative is to give up the fight with the anxiety monster and drop the rope completely. If you let go of the rope, the monster will still be there and maybe scare you, but it cannot drag you into the hole. This is the essence of accepting anxiety compared with trying to control or fight it. This is also related to the concept of mastery we used throughout this program. Mastering anxiety means that the fear does not prevent you from doing what you want to do. Acceptance is also about being open to the thoughts that come and go in anxious situations. It means that you accept that these thoughts arise in your mind, but not that you accept their validity. If one, for example, gets an automatic thought that everyone here can see that I'm nervous, one can accept the presence of the thought while being reasonably skeptical about its validity. It's just a thought, not a truth. If you add these two themes together, you arrive at the following mantra. When I'm experiencing social anxiety, I should accept what's happening inside of me while focusing on what's happening outside of myself. Acceptance inward, focus outward. When doing exposure, it is also important to be observant of your safety behaviors, as we introduced in Module 4. Safety behaviors are everything you can think of to reduce or stop the anxiety while you're doing exposure. If one performs exposure while maintaining safety behaviors, the exposure will have little effect. It's like driving a car by pushing the accelerator and brake at the same time, because you want to elicit anxiety with the exposure, while the purpose of the safety behavior is to reduce anxiety. In other words, one might needlessly do unpleasant exposure exercises without harvesting the anxiety lessening effect. Why this is so varies a little from person to person, but the core of it is that safety behaviors maintain anxiety through the pathways we talked about earlier. Among other things, it can reinforce the anxiety symptoms you want to hide or get rid of. It can prevent you from receiving positive feedback from others. And it maintains and reinforces self-focus. Please rewatch Module 3 if you don't know what we're talking about here. And pay particular attention to how safety behaviors fit in this model. Another sad paradox is that safety behaviors can lead to false confirmations of your worst assumptions, like the others do not like me, or I am socially incompetent, etc. Here is an example of this. Let's say you meet an acquaintance, let's call him Dan, on the street and engage the following safety behaviors. Avoid eye contact, think through everything you say beforehand, and leave the situation as quickly as possible. With all this safety behavior, Dan might conclude that you aren't interested in the conversation or that you don't really like him. We can imagine that he doesn't really care if your voice cracks or if you fumble with your words or if you blush. Few people really care about that. Your relationship with Dan is much more negatively affected by your safety behaviors compared with your anxiety. The worst case would be if this leads Dan to stop contacting you and thusly giving you a false confirmation that you really are socially incompetent or something like that. That's the paradox. What you fear comes to fruition because of your attempts to regulate the fear. Let's look at some more examples. Let's say you're doing exposure and actively seeking challenging social situations, but you're always taking sedative medications or alcohol beforehand. This might make your anxiety go away, but you cannot reality check your catastrophe thoughts, ruining the exposure. You're left with the thought, what would have happened if I wasn't inebriated? Let's say you engage in exposure but constantly avoid eye contact and concentrate on not embarrassing yourself. Same point applies here. Avoiding eye contact and concentrating on not embarrassing yourself doesn't let you reality check your catastrophes, while it reinforces self-focus. Or let's say you go on a social event, but beforehand you rehearse several monologues and interesting topics in case the conversation stalls and to impress others. While in the social setting, you rehearse these in case you have to say something. Here again, we see that this will maintain self-focus and make it very difficult to have a natural conversation with others because you're busy with rehearsal. While the catastrophe thought, they will think I'm an idiot if I can't think of anything to say, lives on. You have an important homework assignment for this module, namely to write down every safety behavior you can think of. Our experience is that this can be very difficult because many of these behaviors can be very subtle and difficult to notice. They can also be ingrained in your habits to such a degree that it just seems natural or instinctive. For some, it's best to cut every safety behavior right away, while for others this might seem too daunting or impossible. If that's the case, then you should gradually wane off the safety strategies one by one while doing exposure exercises. Let's say, for instance, that you plan on exposing yourself by riding a bus full of people. And let's say that you have used your cell phone as a safety strategy when feeling anxious. The first step might be to ride the bus with the phone in hand. Then ride the bus with the phone in your pocket, then in your backpack, And then, finally, ride the bus completely without the phone. That was it for this module. In the next module, we'll introduce a worksheet that you can use while planning exposure. We recommend watching the next module before starting exposure. See you later.